Hi, Sylvia.
Konnichiwa.
There we go. We have a couple of exciting things today because I don't know if you know this, but I used to have a habit as a young man, and some of this might be known on the internet. There are a couple of legendary documents allegedly written by me, maybe too spicy for publication, but I used to have this habit where I would infiltrate little niche communities. Sort of Gonzo, Hunter Thompson, Louis Theroux was a huge inspiration as well. Interestingly, Louis Theroux is a disciple of Michael Moore, and I'm not such a big fan of Michael Moore. I think it's too sensationalist. He feels like he's always trying to sell the story, whereas Louis is just wanting to be part of the story.
You're trying to get people to show their cards accidentally. Where Michael...
Yeah, he's accused of that. Louis is always accused of being somehow sneaky, whereas I always was a fan. I think he was always just honestly open-minded and just as innocent.
The curiosity is getting people to demonstrate what's going on.
Exactly. Anyway, so I used to be known for this, and there's a famous case where I went to a faith healer meeting or conference. It was at the Olympic Stadium in Helsinki. There's this legendary document allegedly written by me about this experience. And this was a younger man who was maybe more angry, not at the participants, but very angry at the organizers who were just clearly taking advantage of people. The write-up was funny, but ultimately rejected by the main newspaper in Helsinki as a sort of op-ed. But it's out there.
Read us an excerpt.
No, it was in Finnish. But then I also I've done loads of these and not always written them up, sometimes just written them up for friends or sent audio messages. But I also did, for example, was it the European or the World Championship in mini golf? And that was an interesting subculture.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And you'll be really happy to know, and so will the listeners, that I've gotten back into this habit now for this podcast. And the first one I did...
Can I just ask, the first one, what is it? Commenting on a fan page or something? Or making your own article on a...
It was like a full-on satirical essay, I would call it, maybe.
Put where?
It was sent to various outlets and ultimately not published as an op-ed.
That's cute.
But it made its rounds on the Finnish internet. Arguably, there's this small group of people that are like a cult following of mine. Different from the cult following we have on the podcast. And this was years ago, like a decade ago. I'm not saying they're still there. I'm saying there was a moment where people would really enjoy either coming with me. Some people came with me. And there was always a flask of whiskey. My behavior was very different back then and not very healthy. But the point is, my strength in this journalism, on this podcast, and just generally in life, is to go in to a group of people where you think I don't fit in, where I'm too loud, too rambunctious, and then making everybody fall in love with me. The problem is that sometimes the Gonzo works both ways. And what happened this weekend was very much one of those. I went, you'll be very happy to hear where I went. I went with my little dog, because it was dog friendly, 10 out of 10 points for that. I went to Potfest.
Is that a cannabis plant?
Yeah, well, it should be. It should be some kind of Snoop Dogg rap, a weed smoking festival, but it's actually, that's where because you convinced me that pottery is interesting. So I had to go meet the real deal. And I went. First of all, this podcast and the write-up will be unfortunately nothing like a couple of those legendary. For example, another thing I did in the past was we went to the Open last summer, the golf tournament with my friends. And me and a friend started spreading a rumor that that Robert McIntyre, the Scottish golfer, was reciting Islamic prayers with his caddy in the fairway.
Oh, God. Did anyone go... suddenly turned?
I mean, Bob didn't win it, unfortunately, so at least I don't think any god was on his side that week. And also, over there, we met 0 people of ethnic diversity, other than people who worked at the tournament. So, this place, so let's get the bad and the funny out of the way first. Potfest, in a village called Glein, or something, you can imagine the most soap opera, Bridgerton, most idyllic British village that's so white and wealthy that they have a train station, even though I don't think anyone makes a profit by a train stopping there. There's 17 people there. And there's this beautiful castle there that has these huge grounds in the rolling green hills of Sussex. So this is where Potfest happens, right?
Wow.
And yes, very much like the Open, the golf tournament, maybe not that diverse in the people. It was a little bit like, what's a very white thing, Sylvie?
Tea room in Chelsea, I don't know.
Well, anyway, whatever. It was very white, very middle class. I did not meet a single person where I would put their, I guess, ethnicity in any other box if you have to put people in boxes in the first place. The other thing was that it was so middle class that there was no security. So there's art worth thousands of pounds, right? And they're just on the grass. And then there was like this competition of art, and some of the pieces that I was looking through them, some of the pieces had just gone in the middle of the day. And I asked like someone like, hey, there was this thing about I don't know, like a whale and a boat or something here, and it's not here anymore. And then it was so middle class and safe that the first reaction of everyone was just like, oh, the artist must have gone home early and taken it with them, or
Sold it.
or sold it. Yeah, and you could have just walked away. There was zero security in this place, so maybe fix that for next year. Other negatives, I'm struggling. Okay, I have to say that these Gonzo trips of mine, for those listening who heard these when I did these in my early 20s, there was no alcohol sold there on the entire grounds.
Oh, they could do with some Pims, couldn't they, just to finish off the stereotype?
Yeah, exactly. And
Can I just say, I think we need to translate some of these old 25-year-old Danny ones and just read a couple of excerpts at some point.
yeah, I mean, the Faith Healer one obviously is legendary, and instead of that, I think we'll do an English language sequel and live stream it while I'm there. And you gotta make me react to these things live. That way, you get the real magic.
I just wondered if we'd get any insight into younger year.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, the writing was relatively good, and nobody ever said I was a bad writer, and you would lose a lot of the humor and the sharpness of the finish that I'm wielding. It's better for me to make a different either audio or written document about the next one, which I will find. I promise that'll come. Anyway, any other negative? No alcohol, no security, and pretty white and middle class. But then, slowly but surely, my whole attitude starts turning. I went there to find the funny and to find the maybe odd interactions that I would have found at the mini golf thing that I did, or at the golf tournament or whatever, and actually just found lovely person after lovely person, and they were just getting lovelier. They just took your whole defense of humor and sarcasm and all that, and they just completely disarmed you. And they were fucking smart, and they were good, incredible at what they did, and they were lovely and welcoming. And I thought, oh, this isn't gonna be funny, right? But luckily, we also met. The other exciting thing for this episode is luckily we also then met a proper famous person from television.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I always wanted the first celebrity interview on this podcast to be like the one in the Bruno movie, you know, the Sacha Baron Cohen movie, where he hypes up the audience for a mega special interview with Harrison Ford. Yeah, we didn't get...
We got Harrison Ford.
And then Harrison Ford just tells him to fuck off. But so we got almost there because we got someone with a German name, so we can then introduce her with the Bruno accent, if that's okay. Yeah, it's a reality TV star, but hey, come on, she's lovely, so give her a shot. Anyway, so in addition to her, so this is how it happened. My change in my whole attitude happened like this. I start walking around, and initially something catches my eye, and it's, I don't know, ceramic art, the winner of this talking ass prize of the year. And it caught my eye. I initially didn't know what I was looking at, and I had to walk past the same thing twice, and it was just pretty and weird, and I didn't know what I was looking at, so I got to walk up to this lady to go like, okay, what am I looking at here? And I had already chosen it, so apparently it was some ceramic art inspired by Jerusalem. And now everyone's saying, oh, here goes Danny with his fetish for the Middle East, you know. But I didn't find that out until I've already walked past twice and then decided to talk to her. and her name's Diane Griffin. And I'll put a link in the description. But awesome person, smart, talks a little bit about her art. And I was like, okay, this is changing, really changing this. Then I had to walk around a bit and try to find the funny. And no, it wasn't there. I mean, maybe what you can say is I observed a lot of ladies of sapphic persuasion. Maybe Sylvia as a potter, is that quite common?
Well, I'm in a particularly high sapphic area where I pot, so there's a lot, probably.
Yeah, so it might be a thing, a sapphic hobby, possibly.
Perhaps.
Yeah, and there was like gender and sexual diversity was definitely there. Maybe not so much skin color or whatever, but then the next thing I walk around and I maybe find a few like sapphic ladies, but that's not really something to laugh at. And then I come to this other woman, and her name's Sarah Hood. And the other link in the description for that too. And I start looking at her stuff and talking to her, and it's very interesting. And there's like this bunny that's wrapped itself into the fetal position. And I thought, this is like sad, but also sweet art. What's going on here? And then I start looking at her brochures. And these are like self-employed artists. And this woman, 50%, as in half of every brochure introducing her art and her Instagram and website and whatever they write on those brochures. The other page, so half of it, completely dedicated to charities and links to other people's stuff. Like for you to get help for whatever, ADHD and depression and suicide helplines, things like that. And I thought, would I ever? You think the marketing budget for Talking Ass, obviously we're lucky enough to have Gary and the Cayman Islands money and whatever.
Yeah.
And, the €1.5 million per listener we get from eView. Not everyone's lucky enough to have that. Would I ever spend, when I think about a marketing spend, do you think for a second I thought, half of this should go to charity? Like I should spend half of what I'm prepared to spend on this podcast. I should match what I'm spending and put the other half to charity.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah, so the people like that, and then you go, oh my God, these are impressive people. Plus what they're making is amazing. And you're like, oh, okay, they got lucky with the weather, right? If I was kind of, I don't know, slugging it around in mud and rain and in the English cold rain with some like pottery lesbians, then I'd probably maybe have more funny things to say, but it was just incredible. You walk around and you meet all these people, and then we meet Kadi, who we'll have in a second. A mega interview with Kadi Froelich. And she's from this TV show, right? Which I've seen with like half an eye when someone else has been watching it. And there's this lovely man in it who cries, and he's incredible. And I should have known that this is going to be different, that these people are going to make me fall in love with them. And I hope I charm them, because that's my skill. Like I go into these groups and I pretend to be the dumb jock who's just here as a +1, or just the dumb jock who just got lost on his dog walk and came to see what's going on. But really, I know exactly where I am, right? There was also this one guy who set me straight. I walked up to him. I was like, ooh, very African, your stuff. And then he just set me straight. I think he said something like, oh, you uneducated tub of lard. This isn't African. This is like 16th century European. I'm making pottery like what it used to look like Shakespeare pottery. Yeah.
Yeah.
And anyway, maybe let's let our pro celebrity guest. So Katie is from a show called The Great Pottery Throwdown. If you haven't watched it, it's incredible. And she really charmed me even more than I charmed everybody.
I heard she charmed your dog too.
Yeah, overall, I will have to go back to these. I think we're live streaming from the next one. The problem is I'll have to arrive with that same dumb joke facade. And now people know that I'm sneakily some kind of intellectual. All right, let's kick it over to my lovely conversation with Kadi Froelich.
Froelich.
All right, Kadi, welcome. How nice to have someone famous.
Yeah, really famous. Yeah, definitely famous amongst potters for now.
I think across the cultural divides, because I'd say the Pottery Throwdown, that show, is that what it's called? The Great British something?
It's called the Great Pottery Throwdown. It's kind of a nod to those. It reminds me of that idea of a group of people getting together in the States, when they have a hoedown. They all just get together and just move about joyfully.
Yeah. But it does remind me of every other show in this country has to be called the Great British something.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Great British Bake Off started it, didn't it?
Yeah.
And then, frankly, I think it's the same production company that does a lot of work in that genre. But as far as reality shows go, I like to think that it's one of the more friendly shows. They're really not out to make anyone look bad. So I think that's a massive benefit to the people that are nuts
Oh,
enough to go on them.
it's fantastic. Who's your friend, the man who cries? He's amazing.
Yeah, Keith Brymer Jones. He is brilliant. I think they have to edit out the actual tears that he does cry and only leave one session in per episode.
Yeah, because otherwise he would become some kind of national hero, maybe even religious cult figure. People would start worshipping him. Yeah.
I don't know about that, but I think it's a brilliant role model when art really moves people, and he gets really moved by the art that touches him. And not just that, but the whole kind of profession, I think. Like he was telling us about his chapel plans and the apprentices he's planning to be able to accommodate, and he got so emotional about that. He was crying over a cup of coffee in the canteen. I was crying all the way through that whole experience. Men cry too. I think that's a really valid thing to show.
Hey, men should cry. I agree, especially about pottery, but other things too, like dogs crying, hole-in-ones, they're fine too. But if you see a really nice pot, then particularly that's a spot.
Well, you came to Potfest, you saw a lot of them, and some of them are very special. Some of them, that's art. You don't understand why it moves you. It's nuts.
Yeah, I was moved, maybe not to tears, but that's just me and my inhibitions, right? 'Cause that's because I haven't shed my whatever, my capitalism and my busyness of daily life. I have to shed it all to be able to cry, right?
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe you were just so overwhelmed by the force of the magic that you saw amongst you and the atmosphere in that field on that day that you didn't even know where to put those emotions.
It's that when something foreign interests me, then I put up the protective wall of dick jokes. That's probably what happened.
Okay, fair enough. That sounds standard stereotypical male behavior. I'll give you that.
Yeah. About reality TV though, my favorite was when I arrived in the UK and I never had TVs, but at some point someone I knew was watching something on TV and like between Emmerdale and something else, there was a little like one of those mini shows, like 20-minute, 15-minute shows that was called Britain's Best Walks.
Oh yeah.
And I thought, where have I arrived? These people are like so safe on their little island with no problems in life. They have TV shows about walking. But then again, The Lord of the Rings is a movie about walking, so I guess it's kind of a genre.
Yeah, there's a lot of walking. There's a lot of walking in some of the most major shows I think you'll find out there. What about Game of Thrones? They walk about a lot. Even if they're walking behind other people on horses or dragons,
Yeah.
there's walking. There's Luke Skywalker,
Oh,
he's
that's
got
true,
that.
yeah. He was
I
British,
mean,
clearly, right? Yeah.
yes, those are big genres. But I find that really interesting that there's this kind of personal slowness, this odd little quirky British friendly reality TV thing. Is that part of what we were talking about? People wanting to somehow try and vaguely remember that connection they used to have with the physical world, before. And we're sitting there watching telly. I was reading this weekend, it reminded me about the Great Kettle Surge. So so many of us used to sit down and watch soaps, that during the advert break, the national power grid had a specific guy on standby to flip a switch to allow extra power to power all the kettles that got switched on at the same time while people made their cup of tea in a break. That sense of the whole nation physically getting their asses off the sofa towards the kettle, making a cuppa, sitting back down together. What a unifying experience. And
Yeah.
of course that doesn't happen now because we just watch what we want when it suits us, not according to someone else's schedule.
Well, that brings us back to the show that you were on. The Pottery Throwdown did catch a little cultural moment. Maybe if you ask a cynic like me amongst, I don't know, 35 to 55-year-old white people, but fine. Doesn't matter who it was amongst, but it caught a cultural moment, right? Which is rare with a TV show now. Usually everyone binge watches them by themselves with headphones and never talks about what they watched.
Yeah, that's true. But I think what's interesting about the Pottery Throwdown, how it grew, was that I think it came in the opposite direction to a lot of shows. And I think it was born out of a couple of individuals' desire to try and keep this really traditional local handcraft alive. Potters were really struggling, and Stoke-on-Trent used to export ceramics all over the world. You know, it's a combination of being close enough to a source of coal so they could heat the furnaces and the kilns, keep them going. It had a great canal network so they could get to docks out to Liverpool, and ceramics, it was totally linked to, you know, the empire and the expansion of fashions all over the world. People wanted ceramics that mimicked the porcelain they'd seen imported from China and Japan.
Yeah.
The huge, you know, there's this fascinating period in history, the sort of white gold rush, where in Germany they were desperately trying to invent porcelain at the same time as we were, and our China clay actually helped us, I don't know about win the battle, if that was a battle. You know, that's one of the reasons that people occupied the States, because there was China clay there that they could access to Germany, whereas we had it. I mean, it's really, I get so excited. But basically, it's that culture of the ceramics and the potteries. It's literally called the potteries, the 5 towns up in Stoke-on-Trent, which were the hub of all these bottle kilns and all the things that used to go to facilitate that industry. And no one was buying handmade pottery. You know, it was deeply uncool. It's a really expensive hobby. They were shutting down ceramics departments in schools, after school clubs. There was just no access to clay. People felt extremely cut off from this. And potters were really struggling to survive. So they started at Dr. Potter. They started the Clay College in Stoke-on-Trent. And Lisa Hammond, Keith Brammer-Jones, Kate Malone, the other people behind the scenes are really, really smart. They're artists. They're great at thinking creatively. And they got this TV production company on board. And it was what got me back into making pots. You know, before I started watching the show 8 or 9 years ago when it first aired, I'd forgotten that I used to love making pots. I used to bunk off all my A-levels in the ceramics room at college. I was studying economics and computer science for some mad reason. And I obviously was miserable, and I hid in the clay room and I just played with clay all day. It wasn't till 16 years later I got back to art school and started to learn how to actually work with the material. And at that time, health and safety was so dodgy. I'm severely asthmatic. And there was lead in the glazes. You know, health and safety regulations weren't quite what they are. I walked in the ceramics room and I was like, wow, I'm going to die if I work in here. I'm not going to work with clay. I'm going to suffocate on all this dust. And went into working with copper, which was kind of the closest thing before I then went back to a clay studio a few years ago and realised that everything's been scrubbed clean. It's fantastic. There's an old adage about the potter who had a dog who lived in his studio, and when he died, he cremated it in his kiln. And when he opened the kiln, all that was left was a ceramic cast of the inside of the dog's lungs. I think that's an urban myth, but that's a really good thing to have in mind when you're working in the studio if you feel like you need to clean it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like wood dust and stuff, like if you breathe.
Yeah, but ceramics, the elements in glazes are made of ground up glass, right? So if those goes in your lungs, if glaze goes in your lungs, it stays there. It doesn't, you can't expel
that's really
it.
bad, yeah.
Yeah.
So glazes around children and animals and yourself, you should think about it, yeah.
Well, in their unfired form, Danny, yes, we have to take care of them because they're dangerous. But what were you saying about Stoke-on-Trent? Sorry, I interrupted you.
It was interesting because that brings up something that my first observation, obviously, about walking to this place, the Potfest, was, I mean, my first observation was like, this is incredible that Snoop Dogg hasn't trademarked this as a festival name already. How are they allowed to use this?
I know, right? Genius marketing name. Love it.
But I'm thinking Potfest and this podcast can sort of grow in conjunction, and eventually we will get Snoop Dogg to come with me.
Yeah, I'll happily teach him how to throw a pot. I can make, you know, loads of beginners start off with ashtrays, so I can help him with that.
Yeah, he'll need one of those. Stoke-on-Trent, I had this conversation with Matt Grimmett. I don't know, we were just joking around, and then I said, like, my first observation here was that this is a very middle class and quite pricey. And then Stoke-on-Trent isn't exactly a posh place, and that's like the hub of it in England. That's more known as a very rough place for those who aren't from here. And, well, he was saying that really the profession is very working class and has gone through generations in the same family. And then it's just that nowadays you just have to charge prices that only the educated, well-employed middle class can afford, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that that is an issue. For example, the Clay College in Stoke-on-Trent, because they follow a curriculum that is not according to whatever the higher education curriculum in the UK has to follow. You can't get funding if you want to study there. There are scholarships available, but it is a difficult balance to strike to make it accessible for people. And it's true, it's like any art form, it's not as cheap to produce as one that you buy in the supermarket. So naturally, that gives it an edge of exclusivity, which is not necessarily sustainable or right. But the fact that the craft is still existing, the fact that people are still passing on the knowledge is step one. I know Kate Malone, for example, had set up this foundation called Fired Up for Clay. So she does fundraising events every year, and it's all about getting clay facilities, kilns and workshop facilities into the national network of after-school clubs. So kids, no matter which school they go to, have access to that. That's one organisation off the top of my head that's doing a lot to try and make it more accessible. And maybe programs like the Throwdown, they are mindful of diversity. They're mindful of representing a broad spectrum of society, or a broader spectrum than maybe you find even at something like Potfest. So I think we're still in the early days of trying to regenerate this craft form, this art form, this material with which to make art. I think accessibility is an issue for the arts all round, not just pottery, unfortunately.
Absolutely. I think venues, while gorgeous, like that place where we were at, like a real proper English country house, I'm not sure that that's helping. I think maybe under a different brand, or, you know, like TED Talks have TED Talks and then TEDx that just goes to any old school and anyone can talk and you don't have to be famous or anything. So maybe under a different brand, you gotta, like, I don't know, go to shopping malls and stuff like that.
Well, that's interesting because the Potfest organisation actually started with an event called Potfest in the Pens, which was held in an agricultural cattle auction yard up in the Lake District somewhere. You know, all of these events, you have to apply. So that's another thing about accessibility. You have to apply, okay, which you have to pay a fee to submit. Sometimes it's only £10, maybe £5. Often it's £20, £25 to apply to take part in these fairs. They're oversubscribed, so the organisers get to curate them. They get to have a look at all of the submissions, curate them and pick. So that's why you have the different flavours. You know, the Potfest organisation itself has 3 tiers. I think the one you went to was like a middle tier, so it's curated, but maybe some of us are earlier in our careers than others. And then they have the top tier.
Yeah. About the tiers, though, the art itself between this middle tier that we were at last weekend, it doesn't get any better. As in, then it's just in the eye of the beholder, because what was there this weekend, if it was good enough to, like, stop me in my tracks and be like, okay, I need to talk to some of these people, then it becomes a matter of taste, right? Between those tiers, I would say.
Well, yeah, maybe that's part of it. That's very kind of you to say. There's that element also that I've been working within over the last decade of that. So, for example, an event like Ceramic Art London, which is coming up around the 10th of May, that is proper top tier, you know, international gallery level standards. So either you have major makers there who have technicians or are superbly talented. They've been in it a while. They really understand the material and the processes, and their work, you know, you're going to see some really high standard work at an event like that. It's really hard to get into. It's something to aspire to for some of us. You know, pottery, you could argue, is one of the art forms where you can say that is made well on purpose, or that is made badly on purpose, or it's made badly because that was the best they can do. My pots are a bit wobbly, and that's kind of deliberate because I want to keep those gestures visible. And maybe that's one of the things that really moved you.
Well, there's in general a massive distinction between pottery and ceramic art, which is a lot of this stuff out there at these festivals are actually just conversation pieces that you need to be in a situation where you have some money, the kids have moved out of the house, the dog is too old, it won't break things anymore, and then you can, you know, have these conversation pieces in your living room. There were also potters there who made functional items. One of my favorite things that you make was the what's it called, a soap dish.
The soap dish,
yeah, that has to have some texture so the soap doesn't slide. So you made that with a computer motherboard, right? That was
the old motherboard from my computer. Yeah.
So that's both cool art and functional. That's kind of in between the two, but
Well, thank you very much. That's a massive compliment. It's true. But the thing I've always strived for in my work personally is to make it so that it speaks for itself without me having to explain that to you. So it's great if someone can see that that is it's an impression of a motherboard, then I feel like that piece of work is doing its job because I'm not always there to explain my mad train of thought or thought connections or ideas to people. That is a signifier of really good art, I think. I think that it's something that you need to be able to look at in a gallery, a museum, or on a stand in a field or in a warehouse, and it says something to you. It touches you. And that goes back to Keith, for example, because it touches him. It touches his heart.
Mm.
Even a handmade plate, it could be made absolutely perfectly, but it'll never be machine finished if it's handmade. So then suddenly in using it, you're connecting to the hands that created that object.
Yeah. And awesome. And also, this is like a traveling circus, right? You guys meet in the evenings and have fire pit meals and maybe do a little rain dance. I don't know what else happens. I'm sure there's a sexual element, but you're not allowed to discuss it,
We're all too old. We're all too old and settled for that. Or if there is, I haven't been invited to that part yet, but there's always time. But these events, being an artist or a potter or an artist of any kind is quite a solitary profession. You're in your own workshop a lot of the time with no one or a very small group of people. And these events are the way that we connect. And potters, I've found, more than any generic group of artists. I mean, I'm not a painter, so maybe the painters have these parties too. I don't know. But the potters are just this generosity. There's so many technical things to know that they're very generous. You can ask someone, you can say, God, I'm having trouble with this. I don't know why my glaze has gone milky. Someone will know. Someone around that campfire will know. And they don't mind telling you because it's not a competition. Because everyone's work is so unique. We're not up against each other. We're just presenting the material as we work with it, and hopefully that's connecting with people who want to take some of it home. But this generosity and this community spirit, it is a traveling circus. It's great. There's this fantastic thing. I don't know if I should say. I think it's public knowledge. It's called the Sausage Club. Obviously started as a sausage barbecue, and that's probably the sexual element you were thinking of. But now, to be inclusive for vegans like me and various other food definitions, it's a general cookout. So this amazing guy has this whole setup. He's got burners. He brings a spice crate, and we cook delicious things and we share them together. And in the act of preparing food, and we're potters. We understand how to do heat. We understand how to bring materials together and create something. And
so there are good chefs around.
Yeah, well, I did cook the vegan one. Obviously, I used a recipe, but it was tasty.
You don't think, Katie, that the dungarees and the haircut and the vegan sausages and the whole Brighton thing, you don't think you're a stereotype? Or do you think maybe the stereotype was made after you? Maybe you're the origin?
Well, Danny, I have thought this over the years. I can't help it. Where I lead, others follow. What can I say? I don't pick this haircut picked me, okay? I went in the hairdressers and I said to just make something that, and the dungarees, what can I say? I want to be comfortable. I'm a German Hausfrau. I've been married for nearly 30 years and I've been the ultimate housewife for years. I've followed him all over the world, and now I'm just living my comfy dungaree life and practical hairstyle life and getting my hands muddy every day. It's the dream. I'm living the dream. What can I say?
We love it. But my partner started the dungaree life at like 19 years old. I think she was always in them. Yeah.
I did get out of them for a bit while I did a few corporate jobs, but then I quickly got back into them. There's no time, especially post-children. Jeans, waistbands, there's no place for them in my life.
No, none of that. The dad jeans used to be just the straight fit Levi's. Nowadays, dads have gotten smarter. Now, dad jeans are the fake jeans that are made of some other more comfortable material.
You stole that idea from the mums.
Yeah. No, I know. It was originally, I think it was... Yeah. It was pregnancy jeans originally, yeah. I think, yeah.
You gotta love those stretchy fabrics. That's the way to go.
Yeah. What's next for the traveling circus? Where can people find a nice Potfest?
I think the next Potfest is happening in Shaftesbury, Potfest Southwest. They have about 6 events now. And then there's a Scottish one at Christmas, which, despite the fact that I live in Brighton and it's nearly in Aberdeen, I'm really tempted to apply for because it was such a lot of fun. load up the van. You know what? Last year I did 6 different or 7 different events off the back of the TV show. I just said yes to everything, and by Christmas I was a shell of a woman. And so this year I did not apply for 6 or 7 things. So I've applied only for 2 or 3.
So for Potfest, put some flyers in the clubhouse toilets at the fancy golf clubs that receive a lot of tourists. So there are people there who think around the golf in Scotland is worth £500.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The locals are paying like £40 for the same golf course. Like,
Yeah, I'll swing by St Andrews on the way. That is wise.
yeah.
You're
And I'm
good.
not saying that women don't play golf, but all I'm saying is that there's a lot of wives who'd like something to do that maybe came with to
Oh
Scotland.
my God. You're a marketing genius. I love it. My
Yeah.
God. Yeah, okay, I'll get extras allocated to me and I'll swing by St Andrews and everywhere else
Yeah.
I can find on my way up there. Thank you for the tip.
It's just that a lot of your clientele was dressed in golf clothes and driving the same cars that I see at country clubs. So there's definitely a overlap
Yes.
there.
Yes,
And
it's true, but not if you went to the DIY art market. There you'd see a really different funky crowd.
yeah, no, I believe that. And in Stoke-on-Trent, you'd be lucky to get out alive.
Yeah, it's always quite excitable, that event, I have to say.
So, did you listen to we had an episode about pottery already, believe it or not.
Did you? I haven't
Yeah,
found that
this
one
product
around
has had
chocolate.
3 episodes about wars and then 2 about pottery.
Well, what does that tell you? You know, you've got to up the ratio and try and bring a bit
Yeah.
more world peace.
I mean, I just think Sylvia brought up an interesting point because you said offline something about that there is this desire to get more childlike and muddy, and maybe it also links to everyone being at home so much during the pandemic and having work from home gigs or hybrid work that you just
Yeah.
want to get outdoors and play with something muddy like clay. But
Yeah.
then Sylvia said that there is also potentially a sensual sexual element to it. There was
Okay.
some movie that she brought up where Patrick Swayze does some kind of pottery scene or...
Do you know, it's hard to imagine how scandalous and mind-blowing that was at the time. That character being a potter, was like some funky retro throwback that people had forgotten potters even existed to the general movie viewing audience. And to turn it into something sexual, I mean, it is slimy and pokey, isn't it? Let's face it. No, you pull the pot up, you cone the pot down. It's unavoidable. You pull handles. It's not a flattering look, but that's how we make these things. Who knows which part of human evolution came first? But as far as the sensual and the touching, think about how flat and square everything we touch is right now. Our desks are like, mine's a flat piece of MDF. My phone is really flat and shiny. This computer's square and shiny. There's no texture in my day-to-day life unless I seek it out. You know, we have wooden floors. Okay, they're really practical. I have wooden floors. They're smooth. You know, everything's smooth. Where's the chunky and where's the lumpy and bumpy? And I think that's what our fingers are missing. I really believe there's an input error. Our brains are like error, algorithm missing texture. Seek out something, you know?
Yeah,
I don't
everything
think
is
that's
so
an accident.
sleek. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even in design and tech design, and you worked a little bit in that field, they're always talking about this is sleek, this is cool.
Yeah.
Why does it have to be sleek? Can't it be
Yeah, no,
rough and-
it can't be clunky. We've got to smooth the edges of this, make the experience smoother, make it cleaner, make it more accessible, remove obstacles. You know, what's that doing for our sensory hardware in our brains? And also, more frighteningly, what's that doing for the kids that are now growing up in that world? We all grew up eating worms and falling out of trees. Okay, I lived on the edge of a town where there were trees to climb up and there was some earth to eat worms out of. I'm not condoning eating worms, it was an error, but I feel like I got away just by the skin of my teeth. My kids were like teenagers before smartphones really became a thing. I used to worry about them sitting there playing on their Xboxes when they came home from school. They'd come home from school, get their headphones on and game with their friends that they had just been at school with, all together, shouting at each other, arguing, okay, in separate lounges. I was horrified at the time, and now I miss that. Now I wish that people were at least doing some kind of group activity together, but the algorithm has convinced us it's more fun to try.
I think you're right. I think my interest in all this, at a later stage in life, in all this artsy fartsy subculture stuff and podcasting and all this, Some of it has to do with not being connected to childhood, not being connected to nature anymore. All of these
Yeah.
things bring you closer to it. And the loss of community. I'm a huge fan of, talking to your neighbors, knowing their names, because you never know when they need you or when you need them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you work in tech as well. You understand how that goes.
Yeah.
You're obviously extremely youthful, but not so young that you've never had access to a tree.
I had this officer, platoon commander in the army. I was his number 2 at the time, like radio guy and stuff. So I spent a lot of time with him, and he wasn't my favorite. Like, I thought he was so much worse than the previous guy as an officer. But he was interesting, to observe, because he was a kid from the country and who had all this like old school community mindset and work the land and educate yourself and sing songs around the fire, like this kind of guy. Real annoying, if you want the truth. But at one point, I remember we were in this tall grass and had to like get on our knees, and it was a lot of silence with him actually, because a lot of this was exercises where you're not meant to talk. But at one point, we had this like forever pause that felt like, oh, nothing's gonna happen, and we're just in this tall grass. So he starts looking at what kind of bugs are in there. It's an exercise. We're not like being shot at or anything. And he starts taking like various bugs, and he's like, so look, this is this kind of bug. This is okay, but you gotta grill it first. And then he like takes a lighter, grills it for a while, and eats it.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, this guy just got really interesting, and now I respect him a lot more. Okay, I pick up a different one. I'm like, what's this then? And he's like, oh, those you can eat raw. They're fine.
Oh my
I'm
God,
like,
I
is
thought you were going to...
yeah. Okay, so then I said, all right, show me then, because I'm not doing this first. That's some kind of prank. And he eats that one raw. And then we start going, and I guess this is what they call survival training. I'm pretty full, but I'm going to try. And then, yeah, bugs, there were bad ones, there were good ones, but you do feel connected to the earth.
Yeah, imagine being able to actually name the bugs. Yeah, I'm not sure I would condone eating them. You might get parasites, and the bugs probably didn't like it. However, imagine being able to name the bugs. I can name a few. Obviously, I can name worms. There's a few different types of them.
Those are your favorites.
They're my favorite. And we really tried to bring our kids up in the woods, getting muddy. So, I just think going back to clay, it's just mud. It's just mud. I'm pretty sure that's why, A, it's really important that we remember that. And B, it's important that we stay muddy. We stay connected in the actual earth.
That's amazing. And that's a great one to finish with. I won't have to ask you for a separate public service announcement for the end, because that was an all-timer right there.
Okay, right. I spend a lot of time thinking about this.
That was your masterpiece. I'm going to say for the end that if you have to eat bugs, check that you know what you're doing. If you're in a situation where there's nothing else, some of them don't taste nice, and some of them might be really bad for you.
Thanks, I'll look that up.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie, and we will see you at the next one.
Yeah, I'll look forward to it. I'll give you a free sec dish. It'll be fine.
Lovely. I'll be back.